Number 6. Enemies Within, Nuestra Familia versus the Black Guerrilla Family. In the chaotic and racially charged prison system of 1970s California, power wasn't just taken, it was fought for. Deep behind the walls of institutions like San Quentin and Soledad, two of the most militant and ideologically driven prison gangs briefly collided. Nuestra Familia and the Black Guerrilla Family. Though short-lived, their conflict left a permanent mark in the history of California's deadliest prison wars. The Black Guerrilla Family, or BGF, was founded in 1966 by George Jackson, a revolutionary and author who merged political ideology with prison survival. The BGF was unlike most other prison gangs. Its mission wasn't solely about criminal enterprise or racial control. It aimed to overthrow the U.S. government, dismantle capitalism, and unite black prisoners under a Marxist-Leninist revolutionary framework. On the other hand, Nuestra Familia, formed just 2 years later, in 1968, was born out of necessity, a protective response to abuse and domination by the southern-based Mexican Mafia, also known as EME. Composed of Northern California Hispanics, many of them farm workers or first-generation Mexican Americans, NF was deeply rooted in cultural identity and a militarized structure. It was disciplined, secretive, and ruthlessly efficient. Early on, the two groups found common ground. Both were enemies of EME. Both opposed racial oppression inside prison. In fact, in the early 1970s, there were periods of cooperation between BGF and Nuestra Familia, particularly in their shared hatred for EME's control over drugs, violence, and racial segregation. But alliances in prison are fragile, especially when ideology and power collide. By the mid-1970s, cracks began to form. Nuestra Familia's focus was on military order, strict discipline, and total control over Northern Latino inmates. The BGF, while equally militant, was more concerned with revolutionary goals than prison politics. This difference in priorities led to clashes. Control of drug routes, influence over yard politics, and disputes over new recruits escalated tensions between the two. What started as minor disputes soon turned violent. Inmates were assaulted over territory and respect. Low-level soldiers from both sides were caught in sudden ambushes. While the full-scale war never erupted to the level seen with other gangs, the conflict was enough to permanently end any alliance between the two groups. Prison administrators took note. They began separating BGF and NF members whenever possible, fearing a racial gang war that could spiral out of control. Meanwhile, the BGF shifted its focus back to ideological resistance and political agitation, while Nuestra Familia dug deeper into its mission of dominating Northern Latino gang structures. By the end of the 1970s, the rivalry faded. Not because of resolution, but because both groups turned their attention to bigger enemies. NF remained at war with EME, while the BGF faced off against the Aryan Brotherhood and battled systemic oppression from within. Though brief, the tension between Nuestra Familia and the Black Guerrilla Family serves as a reminder. Even among so-called allies in the prison system, power is everything. And in the end, ideology always gives way to control. Number 5. Marked for death, Nuestra Familia versus Northern dropouts. In the violent world of California prison gangs, loyalty isn't just expected, it's enforced, and betrayal is punished by death. Among the many enemies Nuestra Familia has faced over the decades, one group stands out, not for their opposition, but for their origins. They are the Northern dropouts, former Norteños who broke away from the Familia's grip and paid the ultimate price. Since the 1990s, a hidden war has raged between Nuestra Familia and its own defectors. Known behind bars as dropouts, these individuals once pledged allegiance to the red flag, followed orders, and embraced the cause of the North. But when they walked away, whether to escape the violence, avoid prison politics, or cooperate with authorities, they became marked men. For Nuestra Familia, defecting isn't a personal choice. It's treason, and the penalty is death. It began during the mass incarceration era of the 1990s, when thousands of young Norteños were swept into the California prison system. As the population grew, so did the reach of the familia. But not everyone could keep up with the rules, the discipline, the mandatory cleansings, and the chain of command. Some questioned the cause. Others couldn't survive the politics. A growing number dropped out. To NF leadership, these dropouts weren't just cowards, they were threats. Some testified in court, others joined protective custody yards. A few even formed new gangs. One such example is the Northern Riders, a dropout gang that openly rejects the structure of Nuestra Familia and operates independently inside prison. Their defiance further fueled the conflict. Inside prison walls, dropouts are routinely targeted for removal. Whether in general population or in transitional yards, the orders are clear. If a dropout is seen, they are to be stabbed, beaten, or killed. These aren't crimes of opportunity. They're often coordinated hits approved by higher-ranking NF members. On the streets, the violence continues. Dropouts who return home face threats from active Norteños who still operate under NF control. Drive-by shootings, home invasions, and public beatings have been reported in cities like San Jose, Modesto, and Fresno. Families of dropouts have even been targeted, caught in the crossfire of a war that doesn't end at prison gates. Law enforcement has recognized the significance of this internal war. In many cases, dropouts become valuable informants, offering first-hand insight into the workings of Nuestra Familia. But by cooperating, they put an even bigger target on their backs. Some have entered witness protection. Others choose to hide in plain sight, always looking over their shoulder. For Nuestra Familia, maintaining control means eliminating those who walk away. It's about power, fear, and the message it sends. Once you're in, there's no way out. Today, the war between Nuestra Familia and its dropouts is as active as ever. It's a silent, brutal purge, one that reminds us that in the world of prison politics, betrayal is never forgotten, and loyalty is written in blood. Number 4, barking back, Nuestra Familia versus the Fresno Bulldogs. In the heart of California's Central Valley lies one of the most unpredictable and violent gang rivalries in prison history, the war between Nuestra Familia and the Fresno Bulldogs. It's a rare story. A story not about a gang rising to challenge the system, but about one that refused to be ruled. It all began in the late 1980s inside the California prison system. At the time, Nuestra Familia had established itself as the dominant force among Northern Hispanic inmates. Their street soldiers, the Norteños, operated under strict rules, loyalty oaths, and a militaristic chain of command. But in Fresno, a different kind of gang was taking shape. The Bulldogs didn't want to follow orders. They didn't want to be part of anyone's army. They wanted to stand alone. What followed was one of the boldest declarations in gang history. The Fresno Bulldogs broke away from Nuestra Familia. They renounced all allegiance to the NF and declared themselves independent. This wasn't just defiance, it was open rebellion. The Bulldogs began attacking Norteños in prisons and on the streets. They barked, literally. Their signature dog bark was more than a taunt, it was a battle cry. The prison yards, already dangerous, became even deadlier. Places like Corcoran, Pelican Bay, and High Desert State Prison became hot zones. Nuestra Familia responded with fury. They labeled the Bulldogs as traitors and green-lighted them, meaning any member of NF or its affiliates could kill a Bulldog on sight. But the Bulldogs didn't fold. They fought back, using their numbers and fierce loyalty to stand their ground. Fresno itself turned into a battlefield. Drive-by shootings, retaliations, and gang sweeps became regular headlines. Norteños lost their grip on the city, while Bulldogs swarmed neighborhoods, schools, and street corners. They refused to align with any prison politics, including the Southern-based Mexican Mafia. The Bulldogs didn't play by North or South rules. They were their own breed. The California Department of Corrections took notice. In an attempt to reduce the violence, prison officials began segregating Bulldogs from both Norteños and Sureños. Bulldogs were placed in their own yards, a rare accommodation for any gang. But even this didn't stop the bloodshed. Over the years, both sides have lost countless members to the war. The Bulldogs have become one of the few independent Latino gangs capable of resisting both Nuestra Familia and La EME. For the NF, the Bulldogs represent more than a rogue faction. They represent chaos, disobedience, and a crack in the once solid foundation of Northern unity. Today, the war continues, in prisons, on the streets, and in the minds of young recruits being drawn into the lifestyle. The barking hasn't stopped, and neither has the retaliation. In the world of gang warfare, it's rare for anyone to stand up to an empire like Nuestra Familia. But the Fresno Bulldogs did, and they've been fighting ever since. Number 3. War Behind the Walls, Nuestra Familia versus the Aryan Brotherhood. Inside the concrete jungles of California's most dangerous prisons, alliances and rivalries are forged not just in blood, but in ideology, race, and power. One of the most volatile and deadly gang wars to erupt within these prison walls was between Nuestra Familia, the militant Latino organization from Northern California, and the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang forged in violence and racial hatred. Their war didn't begin overnight. It was built on decades of tension, beginning in the early 1970s, a time when California's prison yards were being carved up by racial lines. Nuestra Familia, created in 1968 to challenge the Southern-based Mexican Mafia, quickly became one of the most organized and disciplined groups behind bars. But as they gained strength, so did their enemies, especially the Aryan Brotherhood, also known as the Brand. The Aryan Brotherhood had its roots in San Quentin, and while they originally started as a white protection group, they evolved into a violent criminal organization. Their alliances included La EME, the Mexican Mafia, with whom they shared a mutual hatred for Nuestra Familia. This alignment placed the Aryan Brotherhood and Nuestra Familia on a collision course. When NF members clashed with La EME soldiers, Aryan Brotherhood members were often the ones doing the stabbing, the killing, acting as brutal enforcers for their southern allies. In response, Nuestra Familia launched their own counterattacks, targeting white gang leaders and Aryan soldiers wherever they could reach them. The 1970s and 1980s became a bloody chess match in prisons like Folsom, Soledad, and San Quentin. Yard recalls turned into battlegrounds. Inmates were attacked in their cells, in the showers, in the chow hall. Nowhere was safe. The Aryan Brotherhood's ruthlessness matched Nuestra Familia's militant discipline, and both sides were willing to die for control. But this war wasn't just racial. It was strategic. The Aryan Brotherhood dealt in protection rackets, heroin smuggling, and murder for hire. And Nuestra Familia threatened their income and influence. In one case, a Nuestra Familia member was targeted simply for refusing to back down from a heroin turf dispute. He was stabbed over 50 times by AB soldiers acting on a contract. As the 1990s approached, the violence reached a boiling point. The federal government took notice. Massive indictments swept up both Nuestra Familia generals and Aryan Brotherhood shot callers. In an effort to dismantle their power, leaders were isolated in Pelican Bay's security housing unit, but even from solitary, they continued to issue kill orders. Despite their racial and ideological differences, both gangs understood one thing. In prison, power is everything, and neither side was willing to surrender it. Today, the Nuestra Familia Aryan Brotherhood war has cooled, but it never truly ended. The scars remain, etched into prison walls, into case files, and into the memory of those who survived the bloodshed. Behind the bars, respect is earned in blood. And between Nuestra Familia and the Aryan Brotherhood, respect came at a deadly price. Number 2. Clashing Kingdoms. Nuestra Familia versus Sinaloa Cartel Street. Gangs. In the modern underworld of drug trafficking and organized crime, old alliances shift, new threats emerge, and power is always up for grabs. One of the most overlooked but dangerous conflicts in recent years is the quiet war between Nuestra Familia and Sinaloa cartel-backed street gangs, a battle fought in alleyways, small towns, and prison cells across California. During the 2010s, the rise of Mexican drug cartels reshaped the American gang landscape. The Sinaloa cartel, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, sought to expand its influence north of the border. They didn't just want to move product, they wanted control. To do that, they began aligning with independent Latino street gangs in California's Central Valley, offering them guns, drugs, and protection. But this expansion came with a price: conflict with Nuestra Familia. For decades, NF ruled over Northern California's Latino gangs, especially the Norteños. Every drug deal, every street hustle, every move made in the name of Norteño pride came under the watchful eye of NF leadership, both on the street and behind prison walls. The Sinaloa-backed gangs, however, didn't care about prison politics. They didn't answer to the regime. Instead, they operated with cartel muscle and cartel money. And that made them dangerous. Their independence was viewed as betrayal by Nuestra Familia. Their presence? A direct threat to the gang's economy and authority. Tensions escalated quickly. In cities like Salinas, Modesto, and Stockton, Norteños clashed with independent crews loyal to the cartel. Drive-by shootings, assassinations, and execution-style murders increased. Some Norteños defected, seduced by the power and money the cartel offered. Others stayed loyal to the Familia and waged war in the name of honor and tradition. Inside prison, the conflict became more complicated. Some cartel-linked inmates refused to follow NF's strict code of conduct, resulting in violent discipline, stabbings, and segregation. Nuestra Familia feared losing control of its street soldiers. For them, it wasn't just about drugs. It was about respect, legacy, and the ability to command from behind bars. Law enforcement took notice. Federal and state task forces began linking murders, weapons trafficking, and fentanyl distribution directly to these street-level cartel affiliates. What they uncovered was a volatile battleground where old-school prison politics clashed with modern cartel capitalism. By the mid-2000s teens, this quiet war was shaping the future of Northern California's gang landscape. The cartel offered profit. Nuestra Familia offered structure and identity. And caught in the middle were thousands of young men trying to choose between two criminal empires, one bound by tradition, the other by transnational power. Today, the war continues. It's not fought in open declarations, but in silent shootings, coded messages, and turf battles that claim innocent lives. As the Sinaloa cartel pushes deeper into American soil, Nuestra Familia stands its ground, determined to protect its territory, its power, and its legacy. In this new era of organized crime, the battlefield has changed, but the blood still runs the same. Number 1. Blood feud, Nuestra Familia versus the Mexican Mafia. In the dark underworld of American prison gangs, few rivalries are as brutal, as deeply rooted, or as enduring as the war between Nuestra Familia and La EME, the Mexican Mafia. This is not just a turf war. It's a violent civil war between North and South, a cultural, territorial, and ideological clash that began in the 1960s and still bleeds into the prison yards and streets of California today. The origins trace back to 1968 inside the walls of San Quentin State Prison. Tensions between Northern and Southern Hispanic inmates had simmered for years, but it was a seemingly minor incident. the theft of a pair of shoes by a Mexican Mafia member from a Northerner, that lit the fuse. For Northern inmates, mostly rural farm workers from the Central Valley and Northern California, the Mexican Mafia's dominance, arrogance, and brutality became intolerable. They banded together, and the Nuestra Familia, meaning our family, was born. But this was never just about prison politics. It quickly became a war of identity. The Mexican Mafia, or La M, primarily composed of Southern California Chicanos, looked down on the Northerners, referring to them as farmers or scraps. In return, Nuestra Familia saw La M as corrupt, oppressive, and self-serving. Each group developed their own codes, symbols, and armies of soldiers on the outside. Sureños for La AM, and Norteños for Nuestra Familia. By the 1970s and 80s, the rivalry had escalated into a full-blown bloodbath behind bars. Stabbings, riots, and assassinations became routine in prisons like Folsom, Soledad, and Pelican Bay. Soldiers who crossed lines, disrespected rules, or even looked at the wrong person the wrong way could pay with their lives. Both gangs enforced iron-fisted discipline. Betrayal or weakness was met with death. The violence didn't stay inside. On the streets, cities like Salinas, San Jose, Fresno, and Bakersfield became war zones. Young gang members were indoctrinated with a hatred for their rivals before they could even vote. Drug trafficking, extortion, and murder were part of the game, all under the shadow of this bitter North versus South feud. Law enforcement responded with major crackdowns. Operations like Black Widow in the early 2000s targeted the Nuestra Familia's leadership, even flipping high-ranking members into witnesses. La EME faced similar pressure. But despite federal indictments, solitary confinement, and surveillance, the war raged on. Today, the rivalry persists. While modern alliances with drug cartels and new enemies have emerged, the hatred between Nuestra Familia and La EME remains carved into the walls of California's prison system. It's not just a conflict, it's a legacy. A generational war passed down from cell to cell, barrio to barrio. In the war between Nuestra Familia and the Mexican Mafia, there is no peace, only a promise that the bloodshed will continue as long as the family and the Mafia both claim the crown.